to Toyota Time with Timmy the Toolman and Sean. Today, what we're going to show you how to do is rebuild a King Coilover Shock with an external reservoir. If you're wondering how I learned how to do this, I watched a really good YouTube video. Yes, we do watch YouTube videos of other people. And I learned how to work on these shocks from this guy who did a really complete and detailed job of showing how to properly rebuild one of these. I believe in giving credit where credit is due, so I'm gonna link that guy's video in the video description. The parts we bought for the rebuild kit is a seal kit that we found on eBay. We'll link it in the video description. So for the most part, you're doing this rebuild for one or two reasons. One could be that you have developed a leak and you're kind of forced into it. Another reason would be for preventative maintenance. Just like the oil in your engine, the oil in your transmission, the oil in your differentials, transfer case, the whole gamut. The oil breaks down and gets old, and then it doesn't do its job as effectively. So the oil in these shocks, when it gets old, it affects the dampening performance of the shock. So you want to regularly service these to get optimal performance from them. It depends who you listen to, but a good rule is somewhere in that area of around 30 to 50,000 miles. For my truck and my Radflo shocks, I plan on doing them about every 30,000, but some people go 50,000, 100,000. It's going to be entirely up to you. If you do a lot of off-roading, then I would suspect you'd want to do it way more regularly than the person that just built a nice pavement pounder that they can show off at the parking lot meets. So if you actually use your truck a lot and you're cycling these shocks thousands and thousands of times, going over whoops and stuff, you're probably going to want to give these shocks love more often than the guy who just drives around the streets. With all that said, let's get started with this job. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to compress the spring so we can remove the bottom spring seat and then be able to slide the spring off of the shock. So with the way this Branick 7600 spring compressor works, this bottom back one is fixed. It's not adjustable. So we have to set the coil on one of the lowest most ones. I guess this one will work, right?
Yeah, I just want to try to not pinch it in there.
Okay. And the goal with using this spring compressor safely is you want it centered on the spring compressor at both axes. So front to back and side to side. So I'm going to get these bottom ones hooked on a coil, and then the adjustment happens on these front arms. You can adjust them up and down to get it centered more. And then another thing you're looking at is how much each one of these arms is sticking out the back. So you could see on this side, it's not sticking out that much. So that means the whole assembly is pushed too far to the right. So I have to bring it this way a little bit. Trying to get it as centered as possible. Okay, that's looking a lot more centered. Looks like these front ones need to come up just a little bit to get it more centered. Okay, that's looking pretty good. Now I'm going to work on these, and these have adjusters on each one, so you can bring up each one of these arms into different positions. So this one looks like it's pretty good right there. This back one looks pretty good too, because we already compressed one of the shocks, and so this is the second one we're doing. And then this one's almost there, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust the whole assembly up and then capture that one. And then again, you want about the same amount sticking out on the back of each one, letting you know it's fairly centered. And then another thing you want to be mindful of is as you're compressing, you don't want these arms to be dragging against the threads. Not to say that you would be down this low anyways. That would be a hell of a lot of compression on the spring.
Yeah,
but
a lot of preload on that.
Yeah, it'd be a ton of preload. So I'm just going to double check and make sure everything looks good. I'm going to go down a little bit. This one is dragging a little bit on there. Okay, I got it back a little bit. Okay, that looks pretty good. It's centered side to side here. It's centered there pretty good. Okay, I'm going to start compressing. People have said I made this stand a little too tall and it'd be harder to compress the spring. It does make it a little harder. It would be nicer if it was lower, but I like the fact that this spring is now at a working height. I don't have to be leaning down. So it works for me. If you're not as manly as me, then maybe you'll build a different stand for yourself.
Yeah, this stands for men only. This is a 700-pound spring, so...
Okay, I think I could get that out. So with the Kings, there's a slot that's built into the bottom seat. So I'll show you. I'll rotate it around, see how that is. So now it just slips out, just like that. And then now that we have the bottom seat out, I can release pressure on the spring and then be able to pull the whole assembly off. There we go. Then I could slide the spring off. And now we're going to bring the shock over to the workbench. The next thing I'm going to do is get these misalignment spacers out of the bottom eyelet. I'm going to capture one of them in my bench vise, get a nice clamp on there, and then I'm going to take a mallet and I'm going to knock it this way. So that one's out. For the next one, I'm going to support it on my bench vise with a couple aluminum jaws so I don't mar up the shock. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a small socket. This is a 11 millimeter 1/4 inch socket, and that fits nicely in there. I'm going to just tap this down and it'll pop it out. There it is. We wanted to remove those misalignment spacers so we can clamp this bottom shock eyelet into the bench vise. It's a better clamp than clamping on the misalignment spacers. A lot of times people choose to replace these bearings, and I actually show how to do that in my Radflo rebuild video. So if you want to learn how to do that, click on the link above and you'll be able to skim through that video and see how I replaced one of these bearings. It's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, these bottom bearings are COM10 bearings, by the way.
COM10?
Yeah, COM10.
Okay, COM10 bearings. Next, I'm going to depressurize the shock. You'll most likely have a Schrader valve cap that you just have to unscrew. This is just like you would see on a bicycle. And I'm going to depress this and release the nitrogen. And Sean and I checked the pressure of these shocks before we got started, and they were very underfilled. They only had 50 PSI. You would want these pressurized to somewhere around 150. Now I'm going to use my Schrader valve core tool from Park Tool. It's a bicycle tool company, and I'm going to remove the valve core. Next, I'm going to clamp the shock body in my bench vise using some soft jaws so it doesn't mar up the shock. Next, I want to remove the wiper seal. It's got a set screw that's a 3/32 Allen. I'm going to dig in here and remove any debris out of here so the Allen will fit in there better. This is a very small set screw, so you don't want to strip it. So I'm going to see if I can get a good contact with this. Okay, that feels pretty good. And you just have to loosen it a little bit. You don't have to take it out all the way. Okay, that's loose enough. Now, Sean and I found that using my spanner wrenches that I bought for this application, they don't necessarily cut it for being able to break these free. Maybe we'll find that it's different on this one. Let's hope. So I'll get this on here and see if I can break this cap free. Ugh, that sucker isn't moving. I'll try to tap on it with a mallet and see if I can get it. Nope. Same thing that happened to us before. Like, these things are just really on there. I wish they fit in tighter. That's what she said.
Yeah, and they bend.
Yeah.
Marring up that cap right there.
So I think we're going to have to go with the barbaric way, and we got on this with a pipe wrench. I know you guys out there in YouTube land are going to be cringing, but that's what we had to resort with because the spanners aren't doing it. Whoever tightened these the last time, I think just went crazy tight. I don't understand why they had to get this damn thing so tight.
Yeah, so for those of you that want your shocks to look all pretty and stuff, don't use a pipe wrench because it's going to mar that cap up pretty good.
So you can see how much force I'm applying to this, and it's not breaking free. So the videos we saw of the guy just like tapping it with a mallet with the spanner wrench and getting it free wasn't our experience.
Yeah, he probably had a better spanner wrench that fit into these holes better.
It's still twisting the whole freaking thing.
Yeah.
Let me get it a little tighter. These things should not be this tight. There it is, finally. So,
oh man,
it marred it up a little bit. But what are you gonna do? You got to do what you got to do. But
I guess you could prepare yourself with new ones.
For the guys that mall crawl and they want the people that are in the parking lot meet to look underneath their truck and see a perfectly beautiful shock, well, if you use this technique, it's not going to be beautiful.
Okay, I'm not going to the mall anytime soon.
Yeah,
then.
don't go to the mall. Okay, so this is the dust seal cap. Now with the dust seal cap out of the way, I can push with my hands and push this shaft retainer down. Sometimes you could do it with your hands, but it's fighting me. So I learned a trick from another video. I have a PVC pipe fitting. I think this is a 3/4 coupling that I cut in half. Now put this over there, and then I could use the wiper seal cap and I could push down and drop it down to expose a snap ring. I'm going to use my spudger tool to get this snap ring out. Just like that. So now with the snap ring out, I'm going to see if I can pull up on this. And it gets to about there, and it's hard to get out. What I'm going to try is use a little bit of air pressure from a bike pump and see if I can get this thing up a little more. I'm going to reinstall the Schrader valve core and then get my bicycle pump. So I'm going to apply some pressure. And this thing moved up a little bit. I've got about 30 PSI on it. And I'm going to push the shaft in here. And that's going to help push this up. At least that's my theory. See how that's popping up? This is another trick I learned from that guy's video. Now I'm going to bring this over to the workbench. So I'm going to take the shock out of my bench vise, and I'm going to pour the oil into a container so you can see how dirty it is. And you can clearly see the difference. Look how dark this is. And then this is a container of new King shock oil that's basically clear. That fluid was pretty dirty. I'm going to take out the valve core again on the reservoir. And then just using my fingers, I'm going to push the valve cap side in. Try to. Thing's fighting me. Yeah, sucker's in there. I'm going to tap on it with a mallet. It's kind of stuck. There we go. So now that exposes another snap ring, and there's a lot of grit in here, so I'm going to get in with the brush and clean that out before I remove this cap. And I'm going to use a little shop air to blow this out. I'm going to use my spudger tool to remove another snap ring here. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this tool. This is used to pull valve stems into wheels. I'm going to screw it on there, and I have my helper, and I'm going to pull this sucker out right into my face. There we go. And then now inside here, you have the floating piston. And on this side of the floating piston, you have nitrogen. On the opposite side of the floating piston, you have some oil in there. So we want to remove that floating piston. I have this tool I made. This is a piece of 1/4 by 20 all thread. And what I did is I cut off a section and I welded it to make a T-bar. And then I put a little bit of shrink tubing on there to make it to where it won't scratch things. So I'm going to thread that into the floating piston. Okay, it's in there. And then now I should be able to pull it out, at least in theory. Gotta grab this. Oh, I want to keep this upright because there's oil in there. And you can see when I dump this out how much oil's in there. And now what I'll do is I'm just going to bring this over to a drain pan, and I'm going to let the reservoir and the shock body just drain into the drain pan. Next, I'm going to capture the shock shaft assembly in my bench vise with some soft jaws. This shaft retainer nut is a 15/16. I'm going to use my Milwaukee Impact to zip that off. And now we're going to bring this whole assembly back over to the top of my toolbox. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay out the parts in succession so I know the proper order they go on the shaft. So I already got the shaft nut off, and I'm going to take off the shaft nut spacer. I'm going to put everything down on the towels in the same orientation it's on the shaft. You have a top shim stack, and this is the rebound shim stack, and I'm going to slide that off, and they go from small to large up against the piston. So I'll set those down. With the piston, when you remove it, the compression shims are most likely going to stick underneath. So I'm going to carefully slide that off, and you'll see that the compression shims are stuck underneath there. So I'm going to carefully remove those. And with this piston, the side with the more openings points up, and then the side that has less openings faces down. So there's bigger openings on this side. And then I'm going to put these down like that. We have this thing I'll just call a big washer. And then there's another washer that slides over the widest part of the shaft. This one stops right at the step right here. And then you have this, they call it the shaft retainer, I guess. I can't remember what the guy calls it. Seal retainer. So slide that off. And then you have the wiper cap. And this piece right here actually goes in right here. Like that. So you can put that back in there. So this is the order of everything. And now we have to replace a bunch of seals. 2 seals on this. You have 2 seals in here and an outer one in here. And then you have a seal here. And then on the reservoir, there's some more seals you have to replace. There's one on the floating piston. There's one on the valve cap side. And that's it. And this friction ring goes right around here, around the piston. The first seal we're going to replace is this one on the wiper cap. And just take note of the orientation of each seal you remove so you can get it in the right direction. This seal can be put in 2 different ways, and you want to make sure you get the direction right. So just take notice that the open indentation is facing the bottom here. So I'm going to put this against my aluminum jaws, and then I'm going to take this deep 21 millimeter socket and I'm going to knock it out with my mallet. So when taking a look at this, again, note the orientation. You have a flat metal side and then you have the seal lip side. So it goes in like that. So here's the new seal. What I'm going to do is I'm going to lubricate it a little bit and some shock oil that I put in a little shot glass.
That's not tequila?
Yeah, it's not tequila.
It's not vodka?
So then I'm just going to get this started as much as I can. I'm going to bring it over to the bench vise. You can't really get it in there very much. A little hard to get this thing squared up, but do your best. Got to get it close because it's hard to get this thing lined up without dropping the seal. There we go.
Sounded crunchy there for a second.
Okay, that's all the way driven home. Go to your home. Well, I don't know if I pushed on this. Shit, I forgot about this. Guess it's still threading, so I didn't fuck it up.
So be careful of the set screw, huh?
Yeah, be careful of the set screw. I had it sticking out a little bit. I'm going to put this back in the bench vise and make sure that this seal is fully driven in. Okay. There it is. Now I'm just going to remove this O-ring with my spudger tool.
And stab yourself.
And when you're doing this, you could clean it up to whatever standard you feel necessary. You can spray it with brake cleaner and blow it out with shop air, whatever you feel comfortable with. We're just kind of wiping these things down and calling it good. So I'm going to lubricate this one with a little bit of shock oil too. And now I'm going to stretch this over and get it in place. All right, so this dust seal cap is ready to go. The next one we're going to work on is this one, and we want to remove this piece. I don't know exactly what it's called, but get that out of our way. And we want to pry out this seal right here. And with this one, I'm going to note the orientation so the flat side is facing up. Here's the new seal. So the flat side is facing towards me. I'm going to pry that out, and you can see that the flared side goes down. There's another small O-ring in the center. It's kind of a golden color. I'm going to try to pick this out. Some people use metal pick tools. I'm using plastic because I don't want to mar up the sealing surfaces. So you can see this one. And then again, clean it up as best you want. I might spray a little bit of brake cleaner in here and use a little shop air to blow it out. Here's the replacement seal. I'm going to dip this one into the shock oil. Now I'm going to insert that one in.
You got to finesse it in there.
Yeah, you got to finesse it in there.
Fancy finger work. Come on, Tim, finger that thing. Need more practice.
Yeah, I know. I haven't been fingering anything for a while. There it is. That's installed. And then now I'm going to grab this new seal, dip that sucker in some oil, and again, the flat side faces up and the flared side goes down. And this one, you have to use a little bit more strength to get it in there. And then I found a plastic bicycle tool might help me out here. There we go. We'll remove the O-ring, this big fatty here. I'm just going to wipe this out a little bit. And then we'll grab the new O-ring, put a little shock oil on there, and we'll slide that one on. All right, and this seal cap or shaft retainer is now ready to go. Now I'm going to put this right back in there like that. So the next seal we're going to replace is on the piston. It's another O-ring. Get in there. Okay. Gonna lubricate this seal. Slide that sucker on. Next, I'm going to remove a seal on the floating piston. Get off of there. There we go. The people that build shocks for a living, if they watch me, they're like, look at this hack. They would probably have some type of solvent tank or I don't know. We're just wiping it up. It's not that dirty.
Yeah, it is pretty clean.
Okay. Grab the new seal.
Take it for a bath, splish splash.
Put that sucker on there.
Put that sucker on there.
Boom. Goes the dynamite. So the floating piston's done. Now we have the valve cap that we have to remove one of the O-rings from. I didn't say it before, but the seal kit that you get from King has a bunch of seals in it, and it might be kind of confusing to you, but you just have to match them up with the old seal and you'll figure it out. The kit came with some different colored seals, and these fatter ones have another fat one that's kind of like a light brown color. So we think that these seals right here might go to the dial for the external reservoir. We're not pulling that off of the reservoir, so we're not messing with those. So we're not using these seals from the kit. I'm going to put this sucker on there. Okay, and that's ready to go. Before you reassemble everything onto the shock shaft, you want to take a good look at the shock shaft. If there's any nicks or imperfections, I know that the video I was watching, the guy had a emery block and he like sanded down some roughness. This shaft looks perfectly fine and it's going to be fine to reuse. You see the damage here on this eyelet, and we did try to clamp the shaft and remove this because we do have a replacement part, but we failed to be able to get this thing off the shaft. We don't have the proper tooling to be able to hold this firm to where we can get on this with a big wrench and spin it off. We couldn't do it. So if you have any suggestions, we're all ears.
Yeah, but essentially we didn't want to risk damaging the shaft just to replace something that's mostly cosmetic at this point.
Yeah. All right, so now we're ready to put all the pieces back onto the shock shaft. I'm going to lubricate the shaft with a little bit of shock oil. And I'm going to put the wiper cap on first so it goes in this orientation with the set screw side facing downward. Got to work it over that lip. There we go. And then next, we're going to slide this on, and the threaded side has to face the wiper cap, like so. Don't forget this piece right here. If it became separated, make sure that that's in there, okay? That sucker right there. Next is this piece, and this slides over the widest part of the shaft, just like that. The next piece is this other washer that will stop at the step here. And then we have the compression shims, and the small ones face the washer and the big ones face the piston. So I'm going to slide those on like so. Next, I'm going to slide the piston on, and remember the side with the bigger openings faces up. So slide that down onto the shims, and then we have our rebound stack of shims, and it goes from big to small. And then we have the shaft spacer, and then we have the shaft nut. And now we'll bring this over to the bench vise and capture it so we can tighten the nut. So I'm just gonna bottom this thing out, and then I'm gonna get out a torque wrench. Okay, that touchdown. We don't know the official torque spec for this, but I'm going to use the same torque spec that I had for my Radflo shock, and we're going to torque this to 30 foot-pounds. There it is, 30 foot-pounds. I've got these long forceps, and I'm going to clamp it over some paper towels. And then shove it in there and clean it out as best I can. I guess you could spray this out with brake cleaner or something if you want, but I'm just going to do the best I can with the paper towels. I'm doing the same thing with the reservoir, just cleaning it out with a paper towel with the forceps. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pour some shock oil into the reservoir and then put the floating piston in, and I'm going to push the fluid through the hose and into the main shock body to try to evacuate all the air from the hose and from the dial side of the reservoir. Some of it's going to travel into the main shock body. Now I'm going to install the floating piston. I lubricated the O-ring with some of the shock oil, and I'm going to get that started in first. And then you can't forget this plastic friction ring. You have to hold the plastic friction ring against the floating piston while you're pushing pressure down to get it inserted into the reservoir. Wiggle that thing, okay? And then got to keep that compressed and slide that in. Easier said than done. It gets a little cocked sometimes. Okay, there we go. It's going in a little more. Yeah, it's kind of difficult holding the ring and pushing the same time. There we go. There, okay. It's fully in there. I'm going to push this down to where I expose the snap ring groove. I'm going to install the snap ring, and you're going to see why in a second. There we go. Okay, the snap ring's installed. Now I'm going to take my 1/4x20 all thread, screw it in, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to push the floating piston in, and it's going to push fluid through the hose and into the main shock body. Now I'm going to take a look at how much is in there. I'm going to top it off a little more. I'm probably going to fill it up about halfway. So now I'm going to pull back on the floating piston and then push in, and you're going to see bubbles working their way up. And that's my goal, to work all the air bubbles out of the system. And just keep on working it back and forth until you don't see any air bubbles coming up anymore. And the reason why I put that snap ring in is so I don't pull back too far and pull the floating piston out of the reservoir. So I'm just going to keep working the floating piston back and forth until no more air bubbles are appearing in the shock body. We're done bleeding the air in the shock. I have the floating piston fully driven in to the reservoir, and I'm going to make note of where that position is on my all thread with this paint pen, and this will come into play later. Now I'm going to install the shock shaft, and you're going to want to get this friction ring onto the piston, and you have to hold it with your fingers while you're sliding it in. There we go. So now what I want to do is I want to work the piston up and down to get any air out of there. So I push it down into the fluid, and then I pull up, and what I have to be mindful of is not breaking the top of the surface with the piston. So just keep on working it through the fluid up and down until you don't see any more air bubbles coming out. So I could still see air bubbles coming out. More.
So this process requires a certain level of fluid to be in the main shock body.
Yeah, you want a decent amount of shock oil in there to where you can work the piston further down below the fluid and then be able to pull it up a decent amount without breaking the surface of the fluid. If you break the surface, then you're going to introduce air. So you just want to go as close as possible without breaking the top of the surface. Okay, I don't see any more air bubbles coming up. Okay, I think that's good. I'm going to add some more shock oil. I'm going to bring it up close to where the snap ring groove is. Okay, I'm going to pull the assembly up without breaking the surface of the oil. Okay, I'm going to add a little bit more right to the snap ring groove. I'm going to pull this up a little bit further, and so maybe Sean could get a shot here. You want the assembly pretty close to the top. How close? I don't know. Maybe like an inch, inch and a half down, I guess. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this down, and the goal is when I insert this, oil is going to spill out the sides, letting me know that I've evacuated all the air and it's just oil. I might even just put a little bit more in there just to be sure. You're going to waste a little bit of oil, but I'd rather waste a little oil than introduce air. And I'll tie a rag onto the shock shaft so as the oil spills out, the oil will just be collected by the rag. The shock rebuilding professionals have like this special little cup that they can slide on here to capture the oil. Make sure the shock shaft is pretty high. The piston assembly is right there near the top of the surface of the fluid. And then I'm going to hold the shock shaft with one hand while I'm working this down with the other. And then I'm hopefully going to see shock oil squeezing out. I'm not seeing it. Oh, there it is. It's spilling out. Work it in. There we go. And I'm going to push this down to where I can expose the snap ring groove. Okay, I see it. Okay, that sucker's in there. And now let's go back to the reservoir. When I pushed in that shaft retainer assembly, it ended up pushing the floating piston out because the oil that I displaced by pushing down on the shaft retainer assembly, it created pressure and pushed the piston out. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to push against the all thread and I'm going to seat this. So as I apply pressure, you're going to see this pop up. I guess it's already seated. Yeah, that's already seated. It just needed to move just a little bit. So now here's what we're left with. We have about 1.25 inches of fluid on the other side of the floating piston. So the floating piston is somewhere over here and we have 1.25 inches of fluid. And then everything behind the floating piston is going to be occupied by nitrogen. How much fluid you have on the forward side of the floating piston is going to be up to you. So I've heard that somewhere around 1 inch of fluid is about right. We have a little bit more than 1 inch and I think that's fine. So now I'm going to disconnect the all thread. And I'm going to take the snap ring out. And now I'm going to get the hose end cap in. I'm going to lubricate this with a little bit of the shock oil and then insert it. Oops. Went a little cockeyed, huh?
Yeah, I can do
there
that.
we go. There we go. Now we're going to get the C-clip in. Get in there. Get in there. There we go. So the C-clip's in. Now I'll grab my tire valve stem puller and I'll connect it carefully. Don't cross thread it. Okay. Now I'll just pull this right up against the C-clip. Just like that. That's fully seated. And then I'll get the Schrader valve core reinserted and tighten it in place with the special park tool that I bought. Okay. Technically, you don't have to get this wiper seal in before you pressurize the shock, because this seal doesn't do any of the pressure or oil holding. All the seals inside the actual shock body are the seals that are holding the pressure and holding the oil. This is just a dust seal that keeps junk from the shaft entering into the main shock body. That's all this dust seal cap does. But I'll go ahead and tighten it on. I will use this spanner wrench that failed to remove it, but it's going to do just fine to tighten it. I'm not going to go crazy tight because it doesn't need to be crazy tight. That's good right there. Just a little bit of force. And then I'll grab my Allen wrench. I'm going to tighten the set screw. And again, this is a very small set screw, so don't go crazy. Just snug it up, call it good. To fill the shock with nitrogen, I'm going to use my Power Tank Shock Boss version 2 portable nitrogen shock tuning kit. It's a mouthful, but it's an awesome tool if you plan on rebuilding shocks and tuning them. So this is their no air loss chuck, which means I could screw this on to the Schrader valve, and even if this had pressure in it, because this pin isn't all the way pushed in, it's not going to be accessing the pressure in the system just yet. So you keep this retracted when you first connect it, and then you grab your hose from your gauge, and it's a quick coupling. And now what you do is you turn this in, the pin will depress the Schrader valve core, so you can now fill it. So we do have a tool review of this Power Tank Shock Boss nitrogen filling kit. We'll put a link in the video description to that video review of this tool. And another cool thing to know is in that video, there's a link you could use to get a discount on any Power Tank products. And they make a whole host of different products. So check out their website and save some money on some very cool tools from Power Tank. I have the regulator set at 200 PSI, and we're going to put 150 PSI into these King shocks. That seems to be pressure that I've heard many times what people recommend for King, so that's what we're going to do. So all I have to do is crack this dial and start watching the gauge. But really what I want you to see is when it starts pressurizing, you're going to see the shock shaft go up. It's going to get happy. It's going to get lead in its pencil. Okay, it started to move up at about 70 PSI, 80. Okay, the shock shaft is fully happy. It's getting close to 150. I'm going to close it off. And it might settle a little bit. I'm going to go up just a tiny bit more. Okay, that's right at about 150. This is a no air loss chuck. So to not lose nitrogen pressure from your reservoir, I back off the pin, and that releases the Schrader valve core. So now I could disconnect this and I will not lose any nitrogen from this reservoir. And then you just simply unscrew this and you have a properly filled shock with nitrogen.
Nice. I like it.
Don't forget to put your Schrader valve cap on. I didn't say it before, but this might be an opportune time to replace the Schrader valve. You can buy them at any auto parts store. You can buy them online on Amazon. So that's something to think about to replace the core while you're doing this job. So the last thing we have to do is we got to take this back to our spring compressor and get the spring installed. We have the shock and the spring captured in the Branick spring compressor, and we're going to start compressing this thing. Feels close. You can kind of tell by the effort you're putting in. I think I'll go a little more. Okay, that should do it. Yeah. Okay. I gotta tell you, This Branick spring compressor is pretty sweet. I know it's expensive, but if you're going to be working on shocks quite a bit, I think it's a worthwhile investment instead of using those death sticks where you're praying that one of those things doesn't break and the spring takes your head off. So there it is. It's my little baby. Hi, little baby.
That's so cute.
My little king baby. Oh, look, I'm hung like a horse.
Okay, enough of that.
All right, we're all done with this job. Working on these high-performance shocks really isn't that complicated. They are fairly mechanically simple when you get down to it. When you take the thing apart, there's not a whole lot of moving parts. The big thing you have to make sure of is when you're starting to disassemble the shock shaft, you're laying everything out in the order it comes off the shaft. So when you put it back together, you can get everything back together the way it was supposed to be. There are other things you can do, which are things that we didn't cover, like revalving. So you can change the rebound and compression shim stack to get different performance out of your shock. And how you do that, I'm not 100% sure, but I would assume that you can call King and just talk to one of their sales staff and say, hey, I've got this shock. I want to revalve it to make it a little stiffer. And then you probably have to give them the thickness measurement of your current shim stack so they'll know which way to go for you to sell you the right shim stack to replace the ones you have. One thing that we wish we had that was a better tool is a spanner wrench, because that dust cap was on so tight, that spanner wrench that I bought wasn't up to the task. So if you're watching this video and you know of a good spanner wrench that would work well for working on these types of shocks, please comment and let us know so we can buy that tool and add it to our toolbox. Because all the videos I saw, the people grab their spanner wrench, they never provide a link to it. They say, yeah, I got this spanner wrench. They're usually able to break free that cap pretty easily or tap on it with a mallet like we tried and failed, and it breaks free. So I don't know if the issue is the previous person who worked on these just cranked on them with too much force, or it's possibly that the spanner wrench that we had just wasn't up to the task. I think something a little bit longer with bigger pins that fit in tightly so the tool isn't going to want to skip out of the holes, and the extra leverage from the longer handle would make it to where you can break that cap free easier. It wasn't the greatest thing to show you taking off those caps with a pipe wrench, but when it comes down to it, you gotta use whatever tools you have available to get the job done, and we got it done. His cap isn't as pretty as it was before, but who cares? No one's ever gonna notice. So you saw all the specialty tools that we use to pull off this job. Do you absolutely have to have every one of those special tools? Mainly the more expensive ones like the Branick 7600 spring compressor and the Power Tank Shock Boss version 2 portable nitrogen shock tuning kit. No, you don't have to have those, but if you're going to be working on shocks quite a bit, it might be a really good investment for you. Having that professional spring compressor and not worrying about having your head taken off if one of those spring compressor doohickeys break and the spring pops off and slams right into your skull and kills you, I'd say the $1,000 spent is probably worth it to save your life. You could go to some shop and have them fill the nitrogen for you, but if you do it enough to where you're topping off your shocks using a shop, you're servicing your shocks using a shop, pretty soon that's going to add up, and that Power Tank nitrogen kit's going to pay for itself. And also that Power Tank nitrogen kit is great if you're going to go out somewhere and tune your shocks. So you can go out to some desert run where there's some whoops, and you could have that nice portable kit with you and you can dial in your shocks. So it's not just for servicing shocks, it's for tuning them also. With all that said, we thank you for watching Toyota Time with Timmy the Toolman and Sean. We will, of course, be back with more videos. Thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing. If you haven't subscribed yet, I don't know what you're waiting for. Click on that subscribe button and also click on that notification bell if you'd like to be notified when we put up new content on our channel, which we are always putting up very helpful and sick mods kind of content like this video here. Peace out, happy wrenching, happy shock rebuilding, bye-bye.